Is it likely that any minds were really changed?
Unfortunately, no, I don't think so. I think that the gaffes, and we saw this from the questions that reporters had after his brief talk, the gaffes really highlighted their concerns that he's not quite in full control of his faculties, right? And I don't want this to be a conversation about his age alone. There have been conversations about potentially he's over preparing for these conversations because he is concerned about the optics and the concerns about his age. So I think some of this is also getting chalked up to nerves, right? But either way, he is not doing the work that's necessary to reassure voters that he's ready for the job for the next 4 years.
So what does that look like? Because we're looking at a fairly short window. I'm guessing here, Jen, we've got Milwaukee next week, and then we turn our attention to Chicago, and the idea of a contested convention is a lot scarier to some Democrats than just keeping Joe Biden right in the chair. What does he do in the next 2 weeks?
What he's really got to do, and I think what Democrats at large have to do, is get really serious about if this is going to be the candidate, if he is the guy, he says he's the guy. What does that mean for his surrogates? What does that mean for one single unified message that they can get out to voters about his preparedness? They haven't done this yet. And this is something I frequently talk about with the comparison between the Democrats and Republicans. Republicans can really get behind one singular message or set of narratives, and they really push it to voters. Democrats have consistently struggled with this, and it's very clear to see the dissension between factions in Democratic parties and groups. It's very clear to see when there's issues between the Harris camp and the Biden camp, and they've got to get on the same page. If they do not, they are not going to be successful in November.
Well, as we consider what it takes to be successful in November, we do have some comparison to what it took to be successful the last go around in 2020. And what we do know is that Joe Biden, in order to win, relied on a coalition in part comprised of voters of color, be it Hispanic voters or black voters, young voters as well. We know he spent some part of his day today reaching out to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus. Notably, publicly, most of them still seem to be behind him. The defectors that we have seen, by and large, do appear to be predominantly white. And I wonder, Jen, how you read into that. Is he doing the right kind of outreach?
I think he's doing the traditional kind of outreach that he's used to in all his years in Congress and now his few years in the White House. I think that one thing that the Biden camp has not gotten quite yet is that these voters are different. Young people are different. His kind of failings on Gaza over the last 9 to 10 months really resonates with young voters. It's not a positive outlook for them when they think about who is going to actually look out for the concerns that are centered in their day-to-day lives. And on issues, like abortion, democracy, they believe that Biden can do the work, but they are not confident that he is of the presence of mind to see it through. So I think outreach is fine. Outreach is great. But what he's got to do is reassure. And that's where he's not really getting that across.
Well, we've been struck by the support from the CBC, the CHC, the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez personally almost playing a Clyburn-like role these past 2 weeks. Jen, They brought him to the dance the first time. Do they have the influence to do it again under these conditions?
They don't. I want to be completely honest here. And I say that because, I'm a person who my work is primarily with young Black Americans, young brown immigrants, disabled, queer and trans Americans. And the sentiment on the ground is that feels like a conversation between elites. It feels like a conversation between these kind of heads of state, these folks who are untouchables in the Capitol, not people who are actually living the consequences of their decisions. Until they're able to make the messages from the Anna Ocasio-Cortezes and from the rest of the Squad, the rest of the folks that they've been really focusing on, all those Hollywood celebs, right? Unless they make that tangible and material for real people, they're not going to see people coming out to vote. That's the thing. They've got to mobilize, and the mobilization hasn't happened yet.
Could Vice President Kamala Harris succeed in mobilizing, considering she is attached to this administration?
That's a complicated question. Vice President Harris has had some complex kind of opinions on issues that affect young people in particular, especially young Black folks. Her history in California, one that I have a very intimate relationship with, growing up in Oakland, California, and we were born at the same hospital. I know her very well. And a lot of young people feel that her tough on crime ethics early in her career that's indicative of who she's going to be if she ever ends up being the president of the United States. So she hasn't done enough yet to reassure folks that she will not turn back the hands of time over the last 10 years, the work that has been done on abolition, on police reform, on criminal justice. She has the ability to mobilize older Black Americans, older Latinx Americans, who I think are not as affected by those issues, but she does not right now have a stronghold among young people.